Hey tea heads, this is Don from Mayleaf. You know, whenever we give you information about a tea, we always include the picking protocol. In other words, which part of the plant is actually being picked and included in your tea. But why is this important? What practical knowledge does this actually give you? Well, in this masterclass, I'm hoping to break it all down so that you, by the end of it, will be able to get a very good idea, even if it's a sort of broad idea, of the characteristics of a tea just by looking at the tea or by reading the picking protocols on the packaging. And if you're not being given that information by your tea sellers, then I would really request it, because as I hope you'll see by the end of this video, it does really give you a good idea of what to expect from the tea that you are thinking of buying. So you've probably heard of picking protocols before. For example, in white teas, they have silver needle, yin gen, which is just buds. Bai Mudan is a bud and younger leaves. I've done a whole video about picking protocols with white tea. I'll put a link in the description below. With oolong teas, it tends to be larger leaves. With green teas, you'll have a bud and one leaf or a bud and two leaf. And you'll have all of these different grades. For example, you may hear about blended pu-erh teas like 7542, the 4 representing the grade of the picking. But we use the word grade as if there's better or worse. And I want to sort of dispel that idea. The grade is literally a description. It's really a matter for your taste as to what picking you enjoy, what picking you feel suits best to a tea type. And also, it's important that we realize that pickings that are narrow are going to have a more focused taste, whereas pickings that are broad, including a lot of different parts of the plant, are going to be wider. Again, that's a matter of preference. So it is certainly not the case that buds are always better quality than young leaves. It is certainly not the case that if you see stems in your tea, that means it's definitely a low quality tea. This is all a matter of learning your taste, and also producers really fine-tuning their skills to get the perfect flavor, aroma, and texture out of their tea and choosing the right parts of the plant. But I was trying to work out, how am I going to do this? How am I going to show you or explain to you the difference that each different part of the plant makes the tea? Because as I've just said, each tea type is usually, the picking protocol is usually set. So with oolong teas, I'll only get the larger leaves. With green teas, I'll only get the buds and the young leaves. And then I realized that I have here a bag of unsorted Gushu Sheng pu-erh 2018 from Yiwu, 200-year-old tea trees approximately. On our travels, this was just collected. I've got lots of bags like this in my cupboard. And I realized two things. First of all, because it was unsorted, that allowed me to pick it all apart for you, so we've got a wide range of different parts of the plant in front of me. And also pu-erh tea, Sheng pu-erh tea, the pickings are very complete. As you'll see when we do picking protocols for Sheng pu-erh, I always say it's a bud and up to 3 to 4 leaves. So it's a very sort of wide range of different parts of the plant, from the bud to the younger leaves to the larger leaves and to the stems. And the huang pian is normally sorted out, but because this is unsorted, I could get it all here in front of me. So Sheng pu-erh is an example of a picking which is very, very wide. And one of the reasons why people love Sheng pu-erh is that you get a very rich tapestry of different characteristics of the tea. But we've broken it all down. It's taken me an hour or so to do this. I've got buds here. I've got younger leaves, sort of medium leaves, huang pian, and just the stems. So we're going to brew these all up. I'm going to turn the kettle on, and we're going to taste each one separately, and then I'm going to give you my sort of takeaway points here as to the different characteristics of different parts of the plant. And of course, it's important to say that there are a myriad of other factors which are going to affect this: the processing, the cultivar, the terroir, all of these things. So this is just meant to be sort of broad, general ideas that you can then sort of take forward. So obviously, you know, what I'm talking about in terms of the flavor of buds is going to differ if it's bud for a white tea or a bud for a black tea, for example. So I want to put that out there very clearly. This is broad information, but I do think that you will be able to apply it practically to your tea buying decisions. And of course, there are other factors as well that you've got to think of. For example, with an oolong tea, the picking is only done usually once the bud has disappeared. In this case, the bud, as you can see, was still on the stem. So these medium leaves, which are normally the leaves reserved for oolong teas, are going to have a slightly different characteristic to if the plant had been allowed to grow out, right? So there are many different factors here. But as I said, I do think it's going to apply, and you will be able to glean a lot more information before you make your purchase just by looking at a tea. Let's talk about the colors. Immediately here you can see the buds are much, not just finer, but furrier, more golden. Younger leaves are going to be a lot more sort of silver and green compared to the medium leaves, which are going to be much darker. This is 2018 material, so it has had a few years of aging. That's going to play its part as well, of course. So I understand that you could do this again, and maybe we should, with some mao chai. This is the huang pian, the yellow leaf, and stems. Often sort of frowned upon, especially if you maybe don't drink so much sheng pu-erh, but you drink, I don't know, other finer teas. Stems are sort of frowned upon, but let's see what they taste like. Right, I haven't measured the weight. I'm just gonna put them directly in here. I'm not gonna sniff them. I am just going to be brewing, and I'm gonna be sort of being a little bit cautious because I know that, for example, the buds and the stems are going to take longer to brew than the young leaves and the large leaves. So I'm probably going to stagger my brewing a little bit. I'm just putting enough for me to feel like that's going to give me a good sense of the tea. These huang pian, maybe we give them a little break. There we go. That should be enough there. And we're going to put all of these stems in. Okay, I'm going to put these to the side. All my hard work disassembling rough sheng pu-erh. Okay, so let's brew. We've got boiling water, and I'm going to brew the buds first. And I'm intentionally going to overbrew here, oversteep, and I'm not going to do any rinsing. So buds and stem get the first round of the water. Now I'm going to wait a little bit because I want to leave about 30 seconds between these. I'm brewing super simple. This is how I taste at home. If you are interested in this kind of brewing, then look up Gongfu Solar. I'll put a link in the description below, and you'll see this set is the perfect set. It comes with a towel as well. Okay, so now we're going to go huang pian because that's going to take a little bit longer. And then we're going to go large leaf or medium leaf, and then we're going to go for the younger leaves. That's going to take the least amount of time to brew. And as I said, please don't get fixated on what's higher quality or lower quality. This is all a matter of learning what you like out of a tea. And if you ask anybody what they like out of a white tea, you'll get different opinions. You'll get opinions of, oh, I like it to be very bud heavy. I like my bai mu duns to be very fine picked. I like my bai mu duns to include much more of the larger leaf because I think it gives more texture or flavor. So you're going to get a variety of different opinions. Certainly buds and fine pickings tend to be more expensive, but that is simply on the basis of the amount of work it's taking to get those, to get 100 grams of tea, because buds and young leaves are much lighter. So you're going to have to do a lot more picking and processing. Right, I'm pouring away in reverse order. So young leaf, then I'm going for the medium leaf, the huang pian, usually reserved by the farmers as the tea that they will often have bags and bags of. Stems, be surprised look how much color you can get out of the stems. And finally, we've got buds. Now, bear in mind that they have been all brewed at very different times. If you'd brewed them at the same time, the bud and the stem would be a lot lighter, but this was my intention. I know that I want to brew the buds and stems longer because they will take more brewing. Right, so I'm going to start with the buds and roll through it. So imagine the bud is at the top. So let's talk about the anatomy. You start with the stem, right? The stem grows, then a bud flushes off that. The bud grows and then starts to peel off layers. Those layers turn into young leaves. Those young leaves have a different purpose, right? The bud is for growing. It's sort of reaching up, trying to compete with other plants around it. And then the leaves are obviously there to, you know, bring nutrition in, photosynthesis. So you get chlorophyll, you get different components and compounds being created. And then as it starts to thicken and harden and become less water permeable, it again changes its role in the plant. Okay, here we go, bud. So I'm going to be focusing my attention on texture and taste and finish all together. So let's talk texture first. Texture is thick. The mouthfeel and finish is soft and smooth. So thick, soft, smooth. The taste. And I'm going to, again, talk in broad terms here rather than dive into nuances, because I want to give you broad ideas here. The taste is more in the realm of nuts, milks, minerals. Yeah, so raw nuts, not roasted nuts, like raw almonds, macadamias, raw nuts. And that moves into sort of nut milks, and then some minerality. Now, don't get me wrong, there is a little bit of floral, there's a little bit of fruity, but the predominance is in those areas. Right, young leaves, this is going to be a huge difference. Huge difference, amazing difference. So with this one, texture is still thick, not quite as thick, but still thick. The mouthfeel, however, is very, very different. Now I'm getting physicality, much more physicality. I'm getting dryness to juiciness. There's so if we look at the spectrum, soft on one side being gentle and easy in the mouth, whereas the other side being physical. So that might be dry, it might be dry to juicy, which is the case in this one here. So I'm getting a dry to juicy, physical pulling sensation. And as I said, a nice sweet juiciness coming out of it. The flavor difference, much fresher, more of the vegetal, more of the green, as you'd expect, more of the fruits, more of the flowers. And overall more in general. So intensity increase. The flavor has shifted away from the nuts and the milks and now moved to mineral, vegetal, and floral and a little bit fruity. So it's shifted. If this was, so I have images of like, you know, nuts and seeds and grains, like the beginnings of life, right? The sweetness here is like a nutty, grainy, seeded sort of sweetness. And then we move here, we're now having the green, we're having the vegetal, we're having the mineral, we're having the fruits, we're having the flowers in that one. Right, medium leaves. Shifted again. Okay, let's talk about the texture first. Texture is notably thinner, still I would say medium thick, but thinner than the other ones. And the physicality on it is reduced, but definitely more physical than the buds, but less physical than the young leaves. So it's calmed the physicality. It's also just reduced the thickness slightly. The sweetness that I'm getting, instead of it being a grain and seed sort of sweetness, is now moving into flowers and fruits, and just generally the floral fruity notes are coming out more in this, which is exactly why oolong teas are always made, well, predominantly made with medium leaves like this, because those floral, fruity sweetness comes through, and the aromatics are much more in that territory, which is one of the reasons why people love and seek out oolong teas. So I'm getting flowers, I'm getting fruits, but I'm also starting to get some woods. So it's starting to become later in the year. From the beginnings with just seeds and nuts and grains, we've moved into the vegetal note, into the green, into the beginnings of blossoming. Now we're in the sort of flowers and fruits, but also the wood is becoming a little bit more pronounced. And as I said, the sweetness is much more a sweetness that comes from sort of carbohydrates from fruits and maybe some nectar of flowers rather than grain, which you often hear with buds. You hear about malts being talked about, like Dien Hong, like Yunnan black teas that are bud heavy, very malty. So again, comes from that grain. Right, Huang Pian. So now the woodiness is increased, thinner, so texture, again, the same profile or the same shift. We're getting thinner, we're getting softer. So we're starting to move towards a little bit more of the softness of the bud, although it's not quite there. It's actually quite far. It's still got some physicality. But it is notably thinner than all of the other ones before it, and the trend continues again. The flavor moves towards more woods, more spices, more fruits. I'm picking up a little bit of sourness as well there. So the fruitiness has almost like got a little bit of a ferment going on, a little bit. But I'm getting a lot of sweet spices and like cloves and cinnamon and things like that. And so the sweetness has now moved from carbohydrates to woodsy sweetness, you know, cinnamons and cloves and those kinds of sweetness. It's fascinating how the descriptor for the sweetness shifts as you move down the plant from bud all the way down to large leaves. All right, finally, but not least, the stems. And the stems are as soft as the buds. That might surprise some people, because a lot of people would think probably that stems are, I don't know, a little bit, you know, hard, harsh, but actually makes a very mellow, soft mouthfeel. The thickness is actually thicker than probably, well, definitely thicker than this one. And I would say thicker than this one as well. Okay, I brewed it at a longer period of time. So, you know, there's lots of variables that we can play with here. But overall, I'm noticing that it is thicker than, you know, the larger leaves. And it is softer. So it's joining up. Soft. Very, very physical. Physicality starts to reduce, and then goes back to almost becoming the similar physicality to this one. Texture, thick, probably around the same, and then reduces, and then comes back with the stems. Taste is again the join up. So while we had here spices and woods, those woods have carried over but have become lighter, have become nuttier, have become smoother, rounder. And we start to come full circle and have a nuttier woodsiness rather than a sort of more antique wood note or a spicy wood note. And again, the flavor on it is reduced. So if we're talking about intensity of flavor, the bud is going to be less intense than the first leaf. The first leaf is always going to be the most intense in terms of, you know, volume of flavor. So goes up and then again starts to shift down and then returns. So you get this interesting sort of, if you were to draw it on a chart, it would definitely be a closed shape. And if you would look at some of the flavor wheels, I'll put a flavor wheel in front of you and I'll show you, what I mean. Like you're starting with the nuts and the milks and the minerals, and then the minerals are moving to sort of mineral, vegetal, flowery and fruity. Then you're moving to sort of the medium leaves being flowery, fruity, but now we're starting to get some spices and some woods. And then you're getting spices, woods. I wouldn't say you're getting much earth, but maybe a little bit, but it's definitely a bit more autumnal in its nature with the huangpian. And then we sort of go full circle through the winter. The stems are that sort of joining between those sort of woods and earths and the nuts and the milks again. Right, I'm going to brew it one more time. And this time I am going to brew it the same length of time just to see how that works. And so hopefully this is going to give you some really good information about what to expect when you read picking profiles. Because if you read a picking profile that is of an oolong tea and it says medium large leaves, you know that it's probably going to be more in the territory of fruits and woods. If that same oolong tea was picked and let's say the producer decided to pick it when it was younger, it's going to have more floral and mineral notes to it. I hope that makes sense. Right, let's brew these for the same amount of time, just to see if I pick up anything different. Oops, it's a bit full. And so when producers are deciding their picking profile, they've obviously got to decide which leaves are going to contribute, or which parts of the plant are going to contribute the flavor that they want. And part of that decision making is about not just what the flavors are, but how focused you want those flavors to be. As I said, one of the joys of raw pu-erh, one of the reasons why people love it, is because of the fact that it is a very wide picking from buds to large leaves. And therefore you're getting a very broad spectrum of flavors and aromatics. But some people find that a little bit confusing because it means that they find it harder to sort of focus as to the character of a particular pu-erh compared with an oolong, which is a very focused character where all of the aromatics and flavor profiles are focused towards sort of one goal. With pu-erh tea, with raw pu-erh tea, the goal is much more about the sort of natural representation of the terroir in all of its subtlety and complexity. And so there's no right or wrong here, but it's one of the reasons why some people love raw pu-erh and some people find raw pu-erh maybe, let's say, a little bit too vague in terms of its flavor profile compared with other tea types. Okay, let's roll through these. Thick, soft, mineral, creamy, nutty, just starting to pick up a little bit of, floral sort of magnolia note coming through. Mineral, much stronger, more physical, more, dry to juicy, more vegetal. The flowers are brighter. I'm picking up a little bit more of sort of a persimmon style sweetness. A little bit sour, tiny touch of sourness. So we're moving into that fruit, we're moving into the ferment, much more woods, much more spice. Yeah, a continuation, gentler, softer, woods, spices, little bit of flowers and fruits, and then finally it returns the most gentle in terms of flavor. In other words, has the least amount of flavor, but certainly the flavor is a very nice flavor. Woods and nuts and and a little bit of milkiness and minerality there. So do not discount the stems. They definitely add something to the overall effect of the tea. So let's quickly look at some charts again. As I said, if you look at that flavor wheel, you'll see that general progression from the sort of 7 o'clock position all the way round the clock back to the 7 o'clock. Obviously, there's no roast in any of this. That's why the roast is always going to be on 0, because this is an unroasted tea. And then let's make another chart here where we map out the mouthfeel and finish of the tea. So from soft to physical, and physical, as I said, can mean dry. It can mean dry to juicy. And then on the other axis, we're going to map out from thin to thick. So buds would be soft and thick. And then as you jump to the young leaves, you're going to have a massive leap in terms of physicality. The thickness isn't going to change too much, although it will get slightly thinner, in my opinion. But the jump in physicality is the biggest. And then as the leaf becomes bigger, you're getting a reduction in the thickness and a reduction in the physicality. And then you get this join over across with the stems, where you're getting a relatively soft and sort of medium bodied brew. And then we can take the same sort of idea and we can map out flavor from sweet to bitter and from sour to creamy. So it pretty much is the same position for everything. So the buds are going to be creamier and sweeter, but the sweetness is going to come from a more grain-like sweetness, a more nut-like sweetness. And then as you jump to the small leaves, you get this big jump where you're getting a lot more bitterness, a lot more of those bitter compounds, which is why you need to attenuate, you need to control, which is why I had a shorter brewing time. And with green teas, you have cooler water because it's predominantly made out of these leaves. So you get a jump in bitterness and you get a shift away from the creamy slightly. And then as you know, the leaf starts to age, you're moving more away from those creamies and towards the fruities, picking up a little bit of sourness along the way, potentially. But it also does get sweeter, but that sweetness is more of a carbohydrate, you know, fruits, vegetal, even potentially starchy sort of, you know, sweetnesses. And then you get that join again with the stems where you're getting a sweet brew, actually. Let me just taste it again. You know, it's remarkably sweet, light, gentle, but sweet. And in terms of the sour to creamy, it's sort of moving a little bit more towards the milky and creamy. So you get this sort of interesting sort of triangle shape in terms of the texture, the mouthfeel, and the taste. So there you go. I hope that this has been useful for you. Try it out for yourself if you can. Obviously, you're going to have to try and find some Malcha, which is relatively unsorted. You could potentially do this with a very full Baimudan, you know, that has buds and young leaves and larger leaves. You could separate that out as well and see if you get the same sort of differences that I do here. But I would avoid just picking buds from one type of tea and larger leaf from another type of tea, because they've gone through completely different processing and they're probably from very different areas. So what we want to do here is get the same plant, ideally, and break it apart. I hope that this has been useful for you. Let me know what your thoughts are in terms of the differences between different parts of the plant and what you prefer in your tea. And I hope that you can now look at leaves and get a much better idea of what to expect in the cup. That's it, tea heads. Check out our other videos, taste our teas wherever you're in the world by browsing mayleaf.com, and come visit us if you're ever in London. Other than that, I'm Don from Mayleaf. Thank you for being a part of the revelation of true tea. Stay away from those tea bags, keep drinking the good stuff, and spread the word, because nobody deserves bad tea.